The rifle cracked through the blizzard like a broken church bell, and a woman screamed where no woman should have been alone in the winter mountains. On the edge of Christmas Eve, Matthew Garrett lowered the Winchester too late. Snow and wind swallowed the echo, but not the truth already crushing his chest. He ran toward the sound. She lay beneath the pines, dark hair spilled across the snow, buckskin torn at the thigh where blood burned red against white. Her face was young, hardened by wilderness, eyes wide with terror and defiance. She tried to drag herself away, pain stealing her strength. When she saw him, the gun still on his shoulder, she sobbed and raised her shaking voice. "Don't come closer," she cried. "If this is how I die, don't let it be at your hands again." The words stopped him cold. He had come to hunt a turkey for Christmas. Instead, he stood over a wounded Apache woman, and nothing about Christmas would ever be simple again. Before we continue, please take a moment to support the channel. A simple like, a quick comment, or hitting that subscribe button helps these Wild West tales reach more people who love them. Let me know where you're listening from, and thank you for riding along with us. Winter had claimed the mountains of southern New Mexico early that year. Snow clung to the black pine boughs like unspoken warnings, and the wind moved through the ridges with a low, restless moan, carrying the smell of ice, sap, and distant smoke. This land did not belong to towns or fences yet. It belonged to storms, to animals that knew when to hide, and to people who learned early that mercy from the land was never guaranteed. Cedar Pine Homestead sat miles away from that frozen hollow, tucked lower in the valley where the trees thinned and the wind lost some of its bite. The cabin was small but stubborn, built by hands that believed warmth was something you fought for. Inside, Rebecca Garrett had already begun preparing for Christmas, though the day was still a few mornings off. Pine branches rested above the doorway. The oil lamps had been cleaned and set aside, ready to be lit before dusk on Christmas Eve, as they always were. Rebecca believed the dark should never be allowed to win on that night. Her husband, Robert, said little, but every year he made sure the fire stayed strong until morning. Matthew Garrett had grown up with those quiet rituals. He had learned that Christmas was not about abundance, but about returning home, returning whole, returning with something in your hands that proved you had endured another year. That was why he had taken his rifle and gone into the mountains despite the weather. A turkey on the table mattered to his mother more than she would ever admit, and Matthew had never been good at disappointing her. He was a man shaped by distance and silence. Years of hunting and trapping had carved patience into his bones and restraint into his speech. He carried himself carefully, like someone who knew how quickly the world could turn hostile. There were old scars beneath his coat, some from weather, some from men, but he did not speak of them. He trusted his rifle, his instincts, and the belief that if he kept moving forward, he would find his way back. The woman in the snow was his opposite in every way, yet bound to the same unforgiving land. Even wounded, there was nothing fragile about her. Her dark hair was braided simply, practical rather than decorative. The buckskin she wore was worn thin in places, mended with skill, meant for movement, not display. Her eyes, dark and sharp, despite pain, missed nothing. Fear lived there now. Yes, but so did something older and harder, the instinct to survive at any cost. She had not screamed for help. She had screamed because pain demanded it, because life had been torn open without warning. And now, as snow continued to fall around them, two lives that had never been meant to cross stood bound together by a single shot fired in a Christmas storm. One man carrying guilt, one woman bleeding into the earth, and the mountains watching without judgment. The storm did not ease when Matthew reached her. Snow kept falling in thick, slanted sheets, driven sideways by the wind, blurring the edges of the world until there was nothing left but white, breath, and pain. She lay half-curled against the roots of a pine, one knee bent at an unnatural angle. Blood darkening the snow beneath her, She saw him immediately. Matthew stopped several paces away. Slowly, deliberately, he slid the Winchester from his shoulder and laid it on the ground, pushing it farther away with the toe of his boot. Then he raised both hands. Empty, his chest tight with the knowledge that no gesture could undo what he had done. "I didn't see you," he said, his voice rough, nearly torn apart by the wind. "I thought it was an animal." Her jaw tightened. She didn't answer. One hand was pressed hard against her thigh, fingers slick with blood, knuckles white with the effort of staying conscious. The other dug into the snow, as if she might still pull herself backward, away from him, away from the man with the gun. When he took a single step closer, she flinched sharply, a broken sound tearing from her throat. Tears welled despite her effort to hold them back, streaking down her cheeks and freezing almost at once. "Stay there," she said. Her English was clear, but strained, every word forced through clenched teeth. "You've done enough." Matthew nodded at once and stopped. "You're bleeding badly," he said. "If I don't bind it, you won't make it through the night." Her lips pressed together. She shook her head once, stubborn even now. Then another wave of pain hit her, and she gasped despite herself, shoulders trembling. She tried to swallow the sound, to keep her dignity, but tears slipped free anyway, silent and relentless. Matthew knelt slowly, keeping his distance. "I won't touch you unless you say so," he said. "I'll do it slow, and if you tell me to stop, I will." She looked at him then, not at the rifle, not at the snow, but at his face. Her eyes were dark and fierce even through pain, searching, measuring. Finally, she gave a small, reluctant nod. "Be quick," she said, "and don't stand behind me." "I won't," he promised. He cut strips from the lining of his coat, hands shaking as he worked. When he pressed the cloth to her wound, she sucked in a sharp breath and turned her face away, jaw clenched hard enough to tremble. She made no sound, but the tears kept coming, slipping down her temples into her hair, her body fighting between endurance and agony. Matthew's throat tightened. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, again and again, not expecting forgiveness, only needing to say it. She didn't answer. She stared at the trees, breathing through the pain in shallow, measured pulls, refusing to break. When the bleeding finally slowed, her shoulders sagged slightly, the tension easing just enough to reveal how badly she was shaking from cold. "What's your name?" he asked, desperate to keep her awake. "Nayeli," she said after a moment. "I'm Matthew. Matthew Garrett." She acknowledged the name with nothing more than a blink. "You can't stay here," he said. "I've got a camp not far. Fire, shelter. If you try to wait this storm out, I can walk," she said immediately, trying to shift her weight. The moment she did, pain ripped through her again. She cried out despite herself and collapsed back into the snow, breath breaking, tears spilling freely now. The truth was undeniable. Matthew crouched lower, careful not to crowd her. "You can't," he said gently. "And if you try, you'll bleed again. I can carry you." Her head snapped up. "No, I'll ask. Before I touch you," he said. "I'll walk slow, and I'll put you down the moment you say so." She shook her head, panic flashing through her eyes. The idea of being lifted by him, of surrendering that much control, terrified her more than the cold. She wiped angrily at her tears, furious with herself for crying. But the wind howled louder, snow gathered on her lashes. The cold crept deeper. "If you leave me," she said hoarsely, "the storm will finish what you started." "I'm not leaving," Matthew said at once. Silence stretched between them, heavy and final. At last, Nayeli closed her eyes, just for a second, as if letting go of something she had been holding too tightly. "All right," she said quietly, "but only because there is no other way." Matthew nodded. "Careful, reverent. I swear I'll get you there." And as the storm closed in around them, Nayeli made the hardest choice of the night: not to fight, not to flee, but to trust. because the cold had left her no other mercy. The camp survived the storm by inches. Matthew carried Nayeli the rest of the way through the night, his boots breaking through drifts already filling in behind them. He did not hurry, did not stumble. Each step was deliberate, paced to her breathing, to the way her fingers clenched weakly in his coat whenever pain surged through her leg. When he finally lowered her beside the fire, dawn was still hours away, and the wind had not yet loosened its grip on the mountains. For the first day, Nayeli drifted in and out of waking. Matthew stayed close, never crowding her, never turning his back for long. He fed the fire constantly, melting snow for water, warming strips of cloth before changing her bandages so the cold would not bite deeper into her flesh. Each time he touched her leg, she stiffened, fighting the pain with clenched teeth. Tears slid free despite her effort to stop them. Dark lashes wet against frost-paled skin. She did not sob. She did not beg. She endured, and Matthew learned to recognize the moment just before the pain overwhelmed her, when her breath hitched and her hands trembled. "I'm going to lift the bandage now," he would say quietly. "I'm going to press here. Tell me when it's too much." Sometimes she nodded. Sometimes she closed her eyes and said nothing at all. And sometimes she whispered, barely audible over the fire, "Now," when she needed him to stop. He slept little that first night, waking at every shift in her breathing, every involuntary cry she tried to swallow. When the storm finally weakened, it left behind a silence so deep it felt fragile. The second day passed more steadily. Nayeli was awake longer then, her eyes sharper, the fog of pain lifting just enough for her to observe him. She noticed how he always checked his hands before touching her wound, how he kept his rifle leaned against a tree far from where she lay, how he offered food and water before she asked. When the pain came hard, she still cried, but now she did not turn away from him when she did. The tears came hot and relentless, streaking down her temples as she fought to keep her breathing even, jaw locked tight to hold back any sound that might betray weakness. Matthew never looked away. "I know," he said once, when she hissed sharply as he tightened the bandage. "I know it hurts." She swallowed, voice strained. Then, "Don't rush, I won't." That night, he wrapped his coat around her shoulders and sat close enough that the heat from his body reached her, though he did not touch her again once the bandaging was done. Snow fell lightly, no longer violent, settling into the quiet like ash. By the third morning, the worst of the swelling had eased. Nayeli could sit up on her own now, could stand for a few moments with Matthew's steady arm supporting her weight. She tested her leg cautiously, breath tight with expectation of pain, but it held. "Not well, not yet, but enough. You did not let it fester," she said quietly as he checked the wound again. "That matters." Matthew nodded. "I couldn't afford to get it wrong." She looked at him for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind her eyes. "You stayed," she said. "It was not a question. I told you I would." That was when the space between them began to change. With the storm gone and her strength slowly returning, the camp no longer felt like a place of desperation alone. They moved around each other more easily now, sharing tasks in silence. Nayeli gathered small branches while Matthew prepared food. She learned where he kept his supplies. He learned the rhythm of her steps, how she favored her leg without complaint. It was during one of these quiet afternoons that Nayeli watched him clean his rifle. "You trust that weapon," she said. He glanced up. "It saved my life." She considered that, then nodded once. "Show me." Matthew hesitated only a moment before unloading it completely and placing it in her hands. He stood back as she raised it awkwardly, her stance stiff, unfamiliar. When she fired, the sound tore through the trees, sharp and violent. Nayeli flinched hard, lowering the rifle at once. Her face tightened. "Too loud," she said. "It frightens the land." Matthew let out a breath that might have been a laugh. That's fair. She handed the rifle back without ceremony and reached instead for her bow, pressing it into his hands. This listens, she said, if you let it. She taught him patiently how to stand, how to breathe, how not to force strength where calm was needed. Her corrections were light, 2 fingers adjusting his elbow, a quiet word when he rushed the draw. He missed again and again, but she never scolded him again. She said simply. By the time the light faded, his arrow struck true. The following morning, they found turkey tracks cutting across fresh snow. Matthew looked at the rifle leaning against a tree, then at the bow in his hands. He chose the bow. The arrow flew silent. The bird fell without a sound. Matthew stood there a long moment, awe threading through him. I came out here for Christmas dinner, he said softly. Didn't expect to earn it this way. Nayeli met his eyes, something warm and cautious settling there. Then you learned, she said, and learning changes what comes next. The fire burned low behind them, steady and warm, as if agreeing. They had not gone far from the camp when the mountains closed in around them. The valley narrowed, the trees crowding closer, the snow beneath their boots untouched and unnervingly smooth. Matthew felt it before he understood it, the wrongness of the quiet. The way sound seemed to fold inward as if the land itself were holding its breath. He slowed instinctively, one hand lifting slightly as a warning. Nayeli's steps faltered. Her shoulders tightened, her breath catching in a way Matthew had learned to recognize over the past days. Then they appeared. Shapes broke free from the trees and stone, silent and sudden Apache warriors emerging from every direction at once. Bows were already raised. Arrowheads gleamed dull and patient against the white. The circle tightened with practiced precision, leaving no open path, no room for retreat. Matthew reacted without thought. In one swift motion he drew his revolver, stepping back hard until his body blocked Nayeli completely. He planted his feet, squared his shoulders, and raised the gun toward the nearest warrior, his voice cutting through the cold like a whip crack. Back away, he shouted. Every one of you, take one more step and I swear I'll... The circle stiffened. Bows pulled tighter. A dozen eyes hardened at once. From the far edge of the ring, a voice rose deep, commanding, edged with fury. White man, it said, you stand with your weapon drawn over my daughter. The words struck Nayeli like a blow. Father, she cried. The warriors parted as Tokala stepped forward, tall and unyielding. His gaze locked, not on Nayeli, but on Matthew's gun. His expression darkened when he saw her stance behind him, her weight uneven, the blood-dark bandage wrapped around her leg. You hold her captive, Tokala said coldly. You wound her, then hide her in the mountains. Lower your weapon. Matthew did not move. His heart thundered, but his hands were steady, the barrel unwavering. She wasn't taken. He snapped back. She was hurt. I stayed. I protected her. Tokala's eyes burned. You protect her with iron and threat, Matthew, Nayeli shouted, before he could stop her. She stepped forward and grabbed his forearm, wrapping both hands around it with surprising strength. Her touch was urgent, grounding. Lower it, she pleaded. Please. He turned his head just enough to see her face pale, fierce, eyes shining not with fear, but resolve. She shook her head once, silently begging. Slowly, painfully, Matthew lowered the revolver. He did not holster it, not yet, but the barrel dipped toward the snow. Nayeli stepped fully into view then, leaning on him for balance. Gasps rippled through the warriors as they saw the bandage, the stiffness of her movement. Tokala strode forward, fury breaking through his composure. You are wounded. Yes, Nayeli said, breath tight. But I live. Who did this to you? Tokala demanded, his eyes never leaving Matthew. I did, Matthew said before she could speak. By mistake. Hunting. I thought. He stopped, jaw tightening. I was wrong. And I stayed. I kept her alive. If there is punishment to be taken, it's mine. A murmur surged through the warriors, sharp and dangerous. Tokala stepped closer, until only a few paces separated them. You think staying earns forgiveness? No, Matthew said. I think leaving would have earned death. The wind stirred between them, carrying snow and breath, and the weight of too many wrongs. Nayeli raised her voice, steady despite the tremor in her body. He did not bind me. He did not threaten me. He asked before every touch. He fed me before himself. When the pain came, he stayed awake so I would not be alone. Tokala's gaze flicked to her, conflict breaking across his features. I chose to walk with him. Nayeli continued, and I choose again now. Silence fell thick, fragile, at last. Tokala lifted a hand. The bows lowered, inch by inch. Matthew exhaled slowly and holstered his revolver. The click, loud in the stillness. You invite her into your home, Tokala said, after spilling her blood. Matthew met his eyes. I invite her to my family's table, for Christmas, not as debt paid, but as a chance to make something right. Tokala studied him for a long moment, then turned to Nayeli. You would go. She nodded. Yes. I want to see this light he speaks of. I want to choose peace. The chief closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again. Then you will go, he said, but know this, your life will answer for hers. Matthew inclined his head. That's fair. The warriors stepped back, the circle breaking at last. Nayeli's hand tightened in Matthew's sleeve as the mountains released their hold. Together, they turned toward the valley, toward warmth, toward Christmas light, and toward a forgiveness that would not come easily, but had finally been allowed to begin. The forest did not rush them after the warriors withdrew. It seemed to settle, as if the land itself needed a moment to breathe again. Matthew walked a few paces ahead now, slower than before. One eye always on the ground, the other on the space ahead. His hand did not stray far from his holster, but it no longer hovered there in readiness. The danger had not vanished, it had simply stepped back. Nayeli moved beside him, leaning lightly on the support he had fashioned, her steps careful, measured. Each time she faltered, he adjusted his pace without a word. Neither spoke for a long while. What had passed between him and Tokala weighed heavily, not as fear, but as responsibility. Matthew replayed the moment he had drawn his gun, the raw instinct to shield her, the certainty that he would rather take the arrows himself than watch her fall again. The realization unsettled him more than the confrontation itself. Nayeli felt the change in him. You did not have to stand that way, she said softly at last. Yes, he replied. I did. She studied him, the corner of her mouth lifting faintly. Then you understand what you offered my father. They followed the slope downward. As the trees thinned and the wind softened, the air grew less sharp, carrying with it the faint, distant smell of smoke, human smoke, not wildfire. Matthew recognized it instantly. Cedar pine is close, he said. They crested a low rise, and there it was. The homestead sat tucked against the edge of the trees, modest and stubborn, smoke curling from the chimney in a thin gray ribbon. Lamps glowed in the windows, warm and steady, their light spilling softly onto the snow-packed yard, against the darkening sky. The sight struck Matthew harder than he expected. He had not known how deeply he had needed to see that light until it was there. Nayeli slowed, her gaze fixed on the house. It looks awake, she said. My mother believes the light should never go out on Christmas Eve. Matthew answered. She says it's how you tell the world you're still here. They had taken only a few more steps when the front door opened. Rebecca Garrett stepped onto the porch, her shawl pulled tight against the cold. She scanned the tree line. Worry etched into her face until she saw Matthew. Relief crossed her features so quickly it nearly brought him to his knees. She hurried forward, boots crunching over the snow. "Matthew," she breathed, reaching for him. Her hands cupped his face, cold fingers firm, searching him for injury. "I knew you'd come back. I'm sorry I worried you," he said quietly. Then her eyes shifted. She saw Nayeli standing a little behind him, pale with fatigue, leaning on a branch support, her leg bound thickly beneath the buckskin. Rebecca did not recoil. She did not ask questions. She simply moved. "Oh," she said softly, stepping closer. "You're hurt." Nayeli stiffened by instinct, uncertain. Matthew felt it and spoke at once. "Her name is Nayeli. She needs warmth." That was enough. Rebecca laid a hand over Nayeli's, her touch gentle but sure. Then, "Come inside," she said. "No one stands in the cold on Christmas." From the doorway, Robert Garrett watched in silence, his expression unreadable. When Matthew met his eyes, Robert gave a single nod and acknowledgement, not of explanations, but of choices made, and stood by. Inside, the warmth wrapped around them immediately. Firelight flickered across rough-hewn walls. The smell of bread and pine filled the room. Nayeli paused just past the threshold, overwhelmed by the closeness, the heat, the quiet order of a home prepared for a holy night. Matthew waited, heart in his throat. Then she took another step. Rebecca guided her to a chair near the hearth, already reaching for clean cloth and warm water. "We'll take care of that leg," she said calmly, as though such things were ordinary. "You're safe here." Nayeli looked up at Matthew, disbelief and gratitude mingling in her eyes. He nodded once, steady. "You are." Outside, snow continued to fall, soft and unthreatening now. Inside Cedar Pine Homestead, the lamps burned bright, holding back the dark, not with force, but with welcome. And for the first time since the storm began, the night felt like it might finally allow something to heal. The warmth of the cabin settled around Nayeli slowly, like something she was not used to trusting all at once. Rebecca worked with quiet efficiency, cutting away the old bandage and cleaning the wound with water warmed at the hearth. Steam rose softly in the lamplight. Nayeli tensed at first, then eased when she realized the woman's hands were steady, practiced, and gentle. There was no fear in Rebecca's movements, only care. Robert added wood to the fire without a word, his presence solid and watchful, saying more in silence than many men did with speech. Matthew stayed back, giving space, though every instinct pulled him closer. He watched Nayeli's face as the pain flared and passed, saw the way she gripped the chair, but did not cry out. When it was over, Rebecca wrapped the leg carefully and tucked a blanket around her shoulders. "That will hold for tonight," Rebecca said. "We'll look again in the morning." Nayeli inclined her head. "Thank you." Rebecca smiled. Christmas is for tending the wounded too. As dusk thickened outside, Matthew prepared the turkey he had carried down from the mountains. He worked with care, aware of every sound in the room, every shift of breath near the hearth. When the bird was set to roast, the smell filled the cabin rich, grounding, unmistakably festive. Rebecca hummed an old tune Matthew remembered from childhood, one she sang only on Christmas Eve. They gathered near the fire while the meal cooked. Robert poured warm cider into chipped mugs and handed one to Nayeli without ceremony. She accepted it with both hands, letting the heat sink into her palms. Lamps burned steadily along the walls, their light pushing back the long winter shadows. "This is our way," Rebecca said gently. "We keep the light on all night, so anyone passing by knows there's warmth here, in my village." Nayeli replied, thoughtful. "We tell winter stories so no one forgets who they are." Rebecca nodded. "Then we're not so different." Dinner was unhurried. They ate slowly, sharing food and silence in equal measure. No one asked Nayeli for explanations. No one pressed Matthew for details. The night itself seemed to grant them a truce. Later, as the plates were cleared and the fire burned low and steady, Robert motioned Matthew toward the doorway. The cold pressed in when they stepped onto the porch, stars sharp above the snow. "You brought home a fine bird," Robert said at last. Matthew nodded. "I did." Robert looked at him sidelong, then back at the dark trees beyond the yard. "But that isn't what I'm proud of tonight." Matthew waited. "You could have ridden on," his father continued. "Men do that. They tell themselves the storm decided things. Instead, you stayed. You took responsibility for what you set in motion." He paused, breath clouding. "That matters more than any meat on a table." Matthew swallowed. "I don't feel proud." "You don't have to," Robert said. "Pride comes later, if it comes at all. What matters is that you learned." He turned then, meeting his son's eyes. "When you find things of value, Matthew, things worth the weight they carry, don't ever let them slip away. The land will test you enough without you surrendering what you've earned." The words settled deep, heavier than praise, steadier than approval. Inside, Nayeli stood by the window, watching snow drift past the glass. Matthew returned to her side. "I meant what I said," he told her softly. "About wanting you here, not because I owe you, because I choose it." She studied him, measuring the truth of it. "I chose to come," she said. "That matters to me. It matters to me, too." Rebecca watched them from the hearth with the knowing patience of someone who had seen many winters and understood what it meant to survive one together. When the night grew late, Rebecca showed Nayeli where she would sleep, a small bed near the fire, close enough to warmth to keep the cold away. Matthew paused at the doorway, uncertain. "If you need anything," he said. "I'll be right here." Nayeli met his gaze, steady and sure. "I know." As Matthew stepped back into the main room, Robert placed a hand on his shoulder. Brief, but firm. No more words were needed. Outside, the mountains lay silent beneath the stars. Inside Cedar Pine Homestead, the lamps burned through the night, holding fast against the dark. Christmas passed, not with grand declarations, but with warmth shared and wounds tended. And when morning came, pale and clear over the snow, Nayeli woke knowing she had crossed more than a mountain valley. She had crossed into a future she had chosen, and Matthew, carrying his father's words like a compass, knew he would not let what mattered slip away.